Welcome to the Learn webinar series being put on today in conjunction with Engage to Learn and eSpark. Learn provides free research support on learning environments to K-12 district leaders to help empower decision making. Today's topic is MTSS in schools, real-world strategies for literacy and language support. And I'm excited to introduce our esteemed panelists and dig into this important topic. So first we have Ryan McFarland, who is the Chief Executive Officer of eSpark Learning. That's a company that delivers AI-powered curriculum resources aimed at improving student achievement in reading, writing, and math. With over 15 years of experience as a go-to market leader in the education technology space, Ryan is deeply committed to advancing equity and success for all students. Prior to becoming CEO, Ryan served as eSpark's vice president and has previously led go-to-market teams at organizations including Parallel, Schoolmint, Naviance, and PowerSchool. Next, we have Rebecca Bishop. Rebecca is the vice president of district relations at Amplio Learning, helping school districts unify and elevate their special education services, starting in the areas of speech, language pathology, and dyslexia intervention. Becca is a certified speech language pathologist from the University of Washington who has more than 20 years of experience in speech language therapy and oral habilitation with specialization in hearing loss and cochlear implants, clinical research, and other aspects of intervention and educational support for students with communication disorders. Dr. Ed Klein is joining us today. He serves as the Assistant Superintendent for Chardon Local Schools in Chardon, Ohio, where he oversees strategic visions and operations, curriculum, professional development, and human resources. Dr. Klein has worked as a leader in public education for a wide variety of communities and settings, orchestrating and executing whole-scale systemic change within each of the districts that he served. Mike Bagley, is the superintendent for Whitehall School District in Whitehall, Wisconsin, where he's leading the charge to develop learners who can adapt, explore, and thrive in a rapidly changing world. He and the Whitehall School District are pioneers of the Liftoffs Learning Initiative, focused on transforming education for future-ready learners in rural districts and communities across Wisconsin. Shannon Burke is a lifetime educator of 34 years, starting as a high school teacher, eventually becoming an assistant superintendent for teaching and learning. Shannon became an entrepreneur in 2012 as the founder and CEO of Engage to Learn, who has partnered with over 300 districts and is frequently requested as a speaker across the nation on education topics. Shannon sits on several boards, including being a founding board member of Learn. So great. Thank you guys so much for joining us here. Let me do my stop share. We can jump in. There we are. I get to see everyone. So Shannon, I'm going to kick the opening to you. I would like for you, if you don't mind, to explain for any lay people in our audience what MTSS is and why it's important in today's educational landscape.
Well, educators always have a lot of acronyms. So you can be assured if you are a layperson that you probably have heard of a lot of, 4-letter acronyms in education. You may not know what any of them mean. MTSS is the latest rendition of a particular way or method of supporting students, and it stands for multi-tiered systems of support. The idea of it for a layperson is that students really come to the classroom with a lot of different needs, interests, passions, etc. And by being very intentional about setting up tiered systems of support, all of those needs can be met. So I think the whole webinar is going to be essentially following the outline of those tiers, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, and they get more intensive and more individualized as you go up in number. So tier 1, really everybody gets that treatment. Tier 2 is a little bit more individualized and a little bit more intense treatment. And then tier 3, the same. It can even lead to identification. So that, again, for the layperson, intervention means essentially putting a treatment in place that might better meet individual needs that might not be appropriate for the entire classroom. So I think that's what we're going to talk about today. It's been really a great program or focus in education and has really helped us to differentiate a lot more for learners.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Well, let's just jump right in then. We'll talk about Tier 1 literacy foundations. And I want to really start by digging in with our district leaders, if I could. So we've got Ed and Mike here. Either of you can start, it doesn't matter. I'm curious to know how you guys in your district have worked to strengthen Tier 1 literacy. And if there are any challenges that you're facing with Tier 1.
I'll take first stab if you're okay with that, Mike. So we were fortunate in our district. Prior to 2020, we were already looking at ELA adoption curriculum, going through a standard process of looking at what we were teaching, and not even looking at how we were teaching just yet. And I was newer in the role. I was coming with a high school mindset. I had taught high school English for years, been a high school principal, and I recognized I knew nothing about elementary school. And my ignorance is served as the benefit for us there because I needed to pedal twice as hard to catch up where our elementary principals and elementary teachers were to figure out what actually goes into instructing our, quite frankly, our most vulnerable students at those early ages there. That's where I started learning about, I'm using that personal pronoun, I started learning about something called, we now readily recognize as the science of reading. At that point, prior to COVID, no one was calling it that yet. But my point to this is, we became early adopters only through my own ignorance there to say, what are we doing and why aren't we doing what ascribes to these research best practices? The shorter answer even is finding those curricular resources then that meet with what the science of reading is, getting that research, those practices to the teachers and supporting them in their work with it. So again, my ignorance got us, getting myself out of the way and building a system to support the teachers in making sure we're doing the right thing for all of our kids.
Thank you. Mike, same question for literacy foundation. So how have you worked to strengthen your Tier 1 literacy and any challenges that you're still facing with that?
It might sound a little bit, I don't even know what to say, if it's backwards. We're literally trying to figure out a way to provide Tier 2 and Tier 3 for every kid. Because obviously, then if our Tier 1 is strong, being in a rural school, we all know the data, right? We're all educators. Instead of one or two different levels of learning in a classroom, that number is now expected to be 9. We can't differentiate as a human long enough, deep enough to meet every kid where they are. So our adoption piece is really centered around how do we leverage today's emerging technology to provide better Tier 1 instruction for all kids at a personalized level, in essence, providing Tier 2 and Tier 3 simultaneous to all kids. I think that's really where our work has come. The challenges are, again, building a different capacity of who's in charge of learning. I think that piece of working with kids, even at the early elementary level. I was elementary trained. Okay, so my perspective has always been we teach the kids and then work with them on how to learn. And I think that concept is now really come to light post-COVID as emerging tech has come through, the whole AI generation concept. The multi-tiered piece of that was unattainable in small rural districts for us. We don't have enough people. We simply don't have enough people to do the things that we needed to do for our kids. So we really went at finding a system, building a system, creating partners to really provide multi-tiered approaches to every kid nonstop all day. That's really the challenge that we found. And now we're still trying to build that capacity.
Great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So that's interesting. We're going to get to talking more about that too, the interconnectedness between these different tiers of support. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And you mentioned not having enough people, right? That's an education-wide problem. And so one of the things that I think is really interesting, maybe Shannon can speak to this, is kind of the importance of creating a more autonomous classroom, right? So some centers, some small groups, and as a way to incorporate tier one literacy to create that more autonomous classroom to take some of the teacher centeredness out. Shannon.
Yeah, I'll riff off what both Ed and Mike said, which, and, kind of ending with really the whole MTSS system is 3 tiers, but people usually think of tier 2 and 3 as the different thing. And tier 1 is just the same thing for everybody, but that's really not the way tier 1 is defined. Tier 1 is defined as differentiated instruction for everyone in the classroom. Then you go to tier 2 and tier 3. So Mike's idea and the way they're talking about it in terms of like incorporating tier 2 and 3 into tier 1 is really the way it was intended to be, is that there would be a lot of different treatments and opportunities. And really the only way to do that is to break up the classroom, because one person cannot meet the needs of 30 plus kids or even 20 plus kids really with one, all you can do is case the joint. you can manage it, you actually can't meet people's needs. So you've got to break that up with centers, technology, like you mentioned, small groups, so that the classroom becomes more autonomous and the teacher is freed up to meet individual needs and do some of those interventions right there in the classroom. They will never get what they need if everything they need is only when they get pulled out or even included in tier 2. So it really has to happen as a natural integrated part of tier 1 differentiated instruction. And the only way to do that is to break up that whole class into some smaller groups, peer groups, etc., and give them things that they can DIY that are at their level, and then work from that place. And it's really magic when that happens. I mean, you walk in a classroom and you see that in motion and you're like, this is learning, like this is what it's supposed to look like, right? So it's really fun to see that in motion. And I'd love to come see your schools. I'm sure they look like that, Mike.
Love that. Thank you, Shannon. And so I'm going to pitch this one to Ryan. Our panelists so far have mentioned kind of using different technologies for tier 1 support. I know that you're seeing that with a lot of the districts that you work with. So how do you ensure that eSpark has curriculum content to meet the needs of a variety of tier 1 learners? And who are all the learning in different levels, and they're all coming from different backgrounds. So how are you able to do that?
So MTSS, I think Shannon, you hit it on the nail on the head. It's not just an identification of students, but it's really a system of support. And what we think about at eSpark is how can we empower educators to defront the classroom so that they can differentiate early, often, and in a way that's engaging and quite frankly very powerful for students. When we have found that when students find the content has to be standards aligned and has to be appropriate, but it also needs to be engaging, culturally relevant, and really meaningful to them. And I would say, to go a step further, we really want that content to be empowering and sort of giving a vision to the future for those students, so they know why they're learning, and give them a instill a reason to love learning. That's a key success piece for us in the strategy that we pursued with our platform. And it's critical that students also get timely feedback and interventions, whether they're in tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. And as I think we heard from Mike, there's a view that maybe all those things should all be the same all the time, and that goes against kind of what organizationally we've thought of as MTSS. But we can accomplish those things to some extent because of the emerging technology and the power of AI, among other strategies. And Shannon also brought something up that I would just want to add to, which is teacher capacity is a perennial issue in a school setting where you have not just 30 plus students, but you have 30 plus students with a variety of different academic challenges and histories and social emotional, dimensions and other things that are adding to that. And so we really see the teacher capacity precipitously decline when they try to really differentiate for every student. And that's why we wanted to design something that would provide students with the ability to get lessons really at their level with incorporating interest and other affinity areas that drive their learning capacity, and ultimately provide them with feedback and intervention whenever it's possible so that we can actually empower the teacher to continue that learning for each and every student in a very powerful way.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And I have two 10-year-olds that I'm trying very hard to kind of ignite that love for reading right now. And I can sit there just anecdotally and tell you, I can sit there and make them read for 20 minutes, but if they're not interested, if it's not customized to really what engages them, they're just doing eye gymnastics on the page. And so I so appreciate that you're tailoring those learning supports for kids and their interests. Becca, I wanted to talk with you for a second about language foundations, right? So as our linguist here, we know literacy doesn't exist without strong language foundations. And so from your work at Amplio with the speech language pathologist and interventionist, what role does language play in this particular tier?
I think it's a great question. At Amplio, when we're kind of thinking about this, I think the easiest way to frame and think about this is if you think about the Scarborough reading rope. And for those of you who are familiar with that, really what that is it talks about what the foundations are that are needed for strong, fluent reading as an outcome. And we know that we've got kind of two strands that are going to interweave together to make that strong foundation. The first strand is going to be your background knowledge and vocabulary and grammar knowledge that kind of forms the language foundations. And then you've got your phonics and sound and word recognition skills that form kind of the pre-literacy foundation from an orthographic perspective. And when you weave those together, you have the foundations that you need to develop really fluent, strong reading skills that influence fluency and comprehension. And so, from a language perspective, we know that top set of strands where you're focusing on those oral language foundations of vocabulary and syntax and morphology, what are the parts of individual words that go together and what do they mean? Those are really, really key skills. And so much of, the focus of the science of reading has been to reinvigorate so many of our curricula with those elements that have been missing the past several decades across a lot of the country of the bottom strand of like those phonics skills and really reinforcing that sequential systematic instruction and that's needed to build strong word recognition skills. But we also need to lay on top of that those oral language skills so that we can really form the foundations for that strong reading comprehension as fluency develops. And so it's really through the integration of those two things that we end up with the skills that all of our students need for academic success. And so I think that's where I love the idea of tiered interventions where we start to break down some of those silos and use the people that you already have in your district who are experts in oral language development to help those general ed teachers and the other support professionals in your district really start to, like we were talking about, I think it was Ed who mentioned really thinking about all of these students as ours collectively, right? All of these kids need these foundational skills and we can all work together to support them and not necessarily operate in the silos that we historically have operated in.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Well, so that feels like a good kind of tee up for tier 2, right? We don't want to stay just in tier 1. Let's think about these supplemental supports. So thank you for that, Becca. Mike, I'm going to direct this one to you. Can you tell me a little bit more about tier 2 and how you think that resourcing in that tier, meaning like time and people, constraints that impact student support, how do you think about tier 2 in your district?
I think it might be more advantageous to tell you what we're doing. So we're actually doing this stuff and have it in place. We started mid-year last year in our elementary school. We started at the beginning of the year in 8th grade, not specific in literacy, but in math. But in our kindergarten classroom is a great one. We're using eSpark along with a couple of other tools to put true personalized learning in place for kids. And watching that engagement level go up so dramatically, the things that Ryan talked about, the information that goes back and forth to the teacher, the engagement level of the kids, the ability to defront, run centers and be able to move kids through. I've never walked in a kindergarten classroom and not have it be disrupted when I walked in the door. And you talk about kids being locked in and meeting them where they are, and we could see their growth take off dramatically as soon as we adopted that scenario in the middle of the years. So I think the tier 2 piece for us, now we're figuring out what we can do with reallocation of time. Unfortunately, a lot of our tier 2 in the past has been homework and grade support. It hasn't necessarily been learning support or instructional support or coaching the human on how to learn, those types of things. So I think that's really where we've seen the change. But it is really amazing when an adult can walk in a room of 20 kindergartners and not have it all go disrupted completely because the kids are engaged, whether they're with a small group with a teacher, or if we put a para in there, or we have a special educator or someone like that that pops in the room. I think that is what has redefined what that looks like for us.
Great. Thank you. Ed, anything you want to add there?
I'd echo, we are using the eSpark platform, K through 3, as a tier 2 gen ed setting there. Echo also what Becca said about breaking down these silos. That's really so important here. As I'm listening to this and hearing more about MTSS participating with this, I'm thinking of my own daughter who she's in her first year of teaching in a first grade classroom in another district. So not my circus, not my monkeys, but and I'm watching her, listening to her stories. She calls me every day after school. Here's what's going on. I'm like, okay, that's an MTSS problem right there. She's dealing with first graders and trying to figure out how she's going to manage behaviors, move them forward, teach those standards to get them to the second grade next year, which has been the problem since we've had standards. And I'm listening to her and I'm frustrated because I know that it takes a system and it takes constant refinement of the system. Mike had said earlier, we don't have the people to put at these problems here, but we look for different platforms. And yes, it's allocation of whether it's time, money, or staff. Those are the resources that we have available to us moving around on a chessboard there. How are we going to help that teacher with her 20, 30 students there to get them from point A to point B? That's what we're trying to do, and we're constantly evolving on that.
I love that. It's really taking the pressure off of the individual teacher to move that first grade, such a pivotal year, to move them from point A to point B and saying, how can we put a system in place that really supports you all the way around in that goal? That's great. Thank you. Shannon, I know that you do a lot of work in this particular area too. Can you talk to me about what you're seeing in other districts with regards to school and classroom culture?
Sure. Ed queued it up by talking about his daughter. My son actually was a first year teacher a couple of years ago, and I had the same experience. He's like, has me on speed dial, and I'm like, I'm trying to run a company over here, but yes, let me help you. But it was all about like, we're like working in all these districts. And I'm like, I just want to give him what like we're giving these other teachers. Because I think everything that you heard from Mike and Ed on what's happening in their classrooms, teachers don't just automatically, you can't just flip a switch and say, oh, now we want you to do it this way, and they go, oh, sure, yeah, we'll just incorporate, eSpark, as great as it is, and we'll figure out how to allocate our time, no problem. Teachers can't do that individually because they don't have time to do it. They're faced with 25 to 35 kids coming in, tomorrow. So, basically what Engage to Learn does is make those supports. It's essentially, we've created MTSS for teachers because essentially teachers need a system of supports to be able to implement systems of support and continue to evolve their practice to do that. Including literally like what would replace Ed with his daughter and me with my son, which is, an AI opportunity for like everything trained from all that our coaches have always done so that teachers can go on and go like, this is happening. What do I do right now? How do I do this? How do I use this? And how do I incorporate it? How do I change the time frame? And what should I be, So we have to support teachers in being able to implement these things. They are great, and once they get the hang of it, it's one of those things they will never go back. Elementary teachers tend to like acclimate to it quicker, frankly, and but we have to support secondary teachers in this move as well. They need to understand how to break up that classroom the same way. So to get the culture of MTSS in place, you have to also provide the same thing for the adults in the system.
That's great. I love that. Thank you. Becca, I wanted to talk with you quickly about your work with speech language pathologists and interventionists. So how can districts bridge classroom literacy data with language intervention to basically make tier 2 more effective?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Right now, Amplio works across the country with a variety of districts in different states, and state to state, the role of the SLP team specifically involved in tier 2 interventions is different, and it can be different within certain districts within the same state as well. But one thing that isn't different is the fact that regardless of what the district's model might be and what the SLP's role is, whether it's providing direct interventions at tier 2 or providing more of a consultative model, having those professionals integrated with the general ed team and the reading intervention team together on these MTSS teams is really effective, because what we know is when we administer a screener and a student is flagged for a literacy concern, that can stem from a variety of things. It can be related to any number of skills that we mentioned before, kind of in that reading rope model. And so if you get all of these folks together on the same intervention team, they can really dig in and understand the why behind why a specific student may be having deficits. We know, for example, for students who have reading difficulties, 50% of those kids also have developmental language delay. And so there's some really good data to support that. And so there's a lot of overlap between these language skills and the impacts on literacy development. And I think integrating those professionals together first as part of an MTSS team is the first step, so they can get on the same page with each other and then identify together the most appropriate interventions for a student. At Amplio, we've kind of been pulled into this tier 2 intervention space from our SLPs that we were working with in districts. And they said, we love this content. We need it. We need a little bit more plug and play at the tier 2 level so that we can, team with our team members and not increase people's workload by giving them some things that they can work on with students, but instead really providing them with some ready to go intervention materials. And so that's kind of what we've been working on, but it takes integrating those members as the members of the same team that is looking at the data together as a starting place.
Okay, great. And so that is for students with maybe some language acquisition delays, but then also
Yeah, and it could be
multilingual learners as well?
Yes. And I think that's another great point, is that oftentimes in that mix are kids who are learning English as a second language. And so bringing in the EL teachers to that team is also really helpful because they offer yet another perspective on those kids and teasing out those language differences versus a second language acquisition versus a disorder. And I think it's really important to have all those perspectives.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. All right, well, let's jump into tier 3. So this is kind of our special ed tier. So Ed, I'm gonna throw this one to you. How do you keep language and literacy teams aligned rather than siloed? So we talked about kind of that integration. Can you kind of explain some of the importance of addressing student needs in tier 1 and tier 2 as it relates to this third tier?
My knee-jerk response there is we expect that the same curriculum is being used across, regardless of the number of the tier, or regardless of the kid. We want every kid to have access to the standards aligned base curriculum. And I'm using base as the general term right there. Tier 3 are the interventions to support through all of that there. So our intervention specialists, our caseworkers, our Our psychologists, our SLPs are all trained in those base curricula, and they are fully embedded in the gen ed classes in our elementary and middle school classrooms there. We still have a lot of work to do in our secondary classrooms. But in our elementary and our middle schools, that's happening right there. So that the kids are getting that touch point and they're engaged with it the same as every other kid there. Because again, we want high achievement for every one of our kiddos, and that starts in that tier one gen ed classroom there. Am I answering through your question there,
Yeah,
Judy?
absolutely. Speaking
Okay.
to those integrations, and we're doing really well on time too. So, Mike, I'm going to give you an opportunity to jump in there too, if you would like, to just talk about kind of the integration between these three tiers. So, tier three as it relates to tiers one and two.
Well, I think if I'm completely honest, we out of necessity remain relatively siloed. We don't have the capacity to get people in every classroom because our needs are so wide and so deep. But I think, again, that's why I referenced earlier, a lot of what we're providing support for isn't necessarily instructional support based on something that is really impacting learning, it's engagement. So, from that perspective, when we get kids better engaged, we can better target who requires a tier three support and then really start figuring out what they need and then provide that for those kiddos. I think that's what our overall approach has been is out of necessity and at times out of desperation comes necessity, right? Or it becomes innovation, I should say. And I think we've been able to really dive into that because we were not meeting the needs. We were siloing dramatically out of pure scheduling. We were the adults providing the limits on the learning of the kids. So we really went backwards and said, okay, how do we need to rethink? We need to leverage programs like eSpark. We need to personalize the environment for our kids. We need to meet them where they are. Stop using the artificial grade and age band to determine what they should be at, and really look at how do we improve and give them a better look going forward. So, while I'm not answering your question real directly, I think that silo base in our case is a reality unless we better engage kids. So we're not providing all of our time and resources to provide grade support so that people feel better about what they're doing.
Great. Yeah, no, that's great. So, I mean, I think that alignment, the alignment between people who are all trying to support these kids, right? Between your language teams, your literacy teams, that's so important. Thank you. Shannon and Becca, similar question to you. So what are you guys hearing from districts about kind of referral trends and SLP workload right now?
Yeah, I can speak to that for sure. I think, what Mike was mentioning is, in terms of capacity of providers is absolutely, the more the rule than the exception that we're seeing across the country with this, where, people are just keeping their head above water. And you've got, special education providers, whether it's, an SLP or someone who's providing special education level, dyslexia intervention. These caseloads are just exploding, and it was going up before COVID, and it's continued to escalate further since then. And so, I am a firm believer that when appropriate tier one and tier two supports are provided, you can avoid some of those unnecessary special education referrals. There's a lot of kids whose needs can be met in tier two and tier one, if we're not relying on this failure model, right? And so if we have the appropriate systems in place and we have the appropriate supports in place earlier on in the tiered intervention model, we can avoid many of the special education referrals that are now coming in and kind of bogging down and maintaining those silos because of capacity. And so, it's really, we spoke with a district where, there was 25% of the students referred for eligibility were not qualifying. And so those were kids who probably should never have been referred to begin with. And their needs could have been met in a strong tiered intervention, program. And so I think, I think some of the key to this is really understanding where can we reallocate resources to make, to really improve the situation for students and to meet sort of these needs that we have system-wide of not overburdening our tier 3 systems. As sort of a default because we don't know what else to do. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. There was a reauthorization of IDEA, which is our federal law that governs special education, in 2004. And in that reauthorization, there was, new language put in about early intervening and funds that could be available from IDEA for early intervening, which is essentially tier 2 interventions. And I think that there's a lot more flexibility now than there was early on about how we can creatively think about using our resources that have traditionally been siloed in a less siloed way.
Yeah, and anything like that that can help lighten that workload, I think that's huge. We have seen just kind of a magnification over the past couple of years. Great. Shannon, did you want to add anything there?
Sure. I mean, I think it is echoing what everyone's saying, but the more robust tier 1 is, the fewer tier 2 and tier 3 interventions you have, and therefore you have less stress on the system. So, what we find is and we've tracked this, when we're teaching teachers how to truly differentiate tier 1 and utilize all the resources to truly create a classroom where every student is engaged, every learner is in their zone of proximal development, because, it is crazy to think we live in a one-size-fits-all system, and it's been very sticky. That one-size-fits-all system has been very sticky. So we say, oh, you turned, 5 before September 1, but you might have turned 5 within 11 months, and you're all going to be at the exact same place when you start, because that's where we're starting. We're starting in chapter 1, or whatever. I mean, that system is completely illogical when you think about it. So getting rid of that and saying, okay, for all the standards that kids are expected to be able to know and be able to do, let's level even the standard. Those standards have a level entry point, 4 different level entry points just on that standard. You level those, and we teach teachers to do this, like level the standards, look at all the different entry points, autonomize your classroom to where kids have things at their fingertips that they can do. They know exactly what their level is. They own where they are. They own their path to get there, their individualized playlist to get there. Then you don't end up saying, oh, they can't do it because yes, there are absolutely legitimately some tier 3 identifications that you need to make happen, for sure, but not until you've actually exercised the opportunity to see, can they do this standard at the entry point level instead of at meeting expectation level? And have you scaffolded for them yet? Have they had some scaffolding to build up? And so those pieces I think are critical. It's not easy. That is not easy, what I'm talking about. But teachers can learn to do it. I mean, I've seen alternative certified teachers, emergency certified teachers. They can learn to do this with support. And as soon as that happens in the classroom, a lot of these other problems go away, because what we're seeing across the country, people having to outsource these positions. They can't even find them to hire them. They're having to outsource these positions. Now talk about silos. Like, how are you this is someone else's someone else is managing your staffing now because you can't find it yourself. Like, so if we can solve more of it in tier 1, obviously that's the key. And then everybody's happier too and more engaged. And, it's an exciting, engaging classroom to be part of. Attendance goes up. Chronic absenteeism goes down, discipline goes down. You're solving a lot of other problems as well. Teacher attendance goes up. If you feel successful and you're helping kids be successful, you show up to work. When you can't, you don't know what to do, it's overwhelming, you're less likely you're going to need more personal days. So the whole system, is really kind of hinges on them having the support they need to be able to implement that in a way that aligns to their passion, why they went into the profession in the first place.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Really kind of emphasizing the impact on both students and the teachers, right? Feeling engaged and excited about being in the classroom. So good, thank you. Let's talk about kind of building that sustainable system. My words aren't happening today. Sustainable system, like we have been referring to. So I'll throw this out here for whoever wants to answer. I think the the goal for a lot of districts right now is to implement MTSS in a way that makes it sustainable, that makes it a long-term solution instead of a one-year initiative. And so how do you guys make MTSS feel like an integral part of what teachers are doing rather than just another add-on? Whoever wants to jump in there.
I can jump in, and I think the sustainability piece becomes even broader when we really look at a future looking education system that is going to prepare kids for a world they're going to live in, not the past that all of us as educators, and especially as we've gotten, speaking only for myself, older, right, and less connected to what the future is going to look like. I've had some opportunities to travel globally looking at what's going to be required of these young kids. We're talking about kindergartners and first graders a lot right now, right? They're going to live in a world we can't imagine. They're not going to be able to be taught everything that they're going to need to be taught, right? You're talking about 25 plus relearns in their lifetime. How do we really leverage all of these things, all of the tiered systems, the supports, to really provide a kid who is able to learn? That's going to become the biggest challenge in what has to become a sustainable model. So it requires, in our rural settings, a complete relook at everything we do. We really have to reimagine what success looks like. What are our targets? So many of what things that we are doing, unfortunately, are stuck in the past, right? We look backwards to evaluate future success. Counterintuitive, especially when we look at what 2040 can look like, let alone a globally competitive environment where we pay very little attention. I think that becomes the sustainability piece that becomes so essential. The tiered systems absolutely are required. But I don't think if we're unwilling, if we continue to be unwilling to look at overall structural change of school, it's going to become impossible. It has to be a complete relook at everything that we do.
Yeah, that's well said. Good. So future ready being not just kind of pouring in content, but really cultivating that deep engagement with lifelong learning, cultivating that love for it. Thank you. Anybody else want to add anything there?
I just, two things. One, Mike, I heard you in our pre-meeting talk about that as well, and it's an interesting take, and one I hadn't considered before, that notion of future readiness, how we're changing how kiddos are learning or accepting how kiddos are learning. And I'm saying that I've come to future readiness, or where I sit with future readiness is looking at what our high school kids are doing. Right, I'm at that end point of the trajectory, and I really appreciate how you're reframing that. I'm walking away from this panel discussion. That's one of my notes to myself, is to dig into that some more, because it's just not a perspective or a way that I've thought about that same problem there. So I appreciate that. But back to the question, the way we've looked at it, the sustainability of MTSS is we use the PLC framework throughout our district, and teacher efficacy is the short answer to this. I want our principals want, our teachers want. If one of them steps out, the next teacher coming in needs to know how that system works. Using the first grade model as the example here, new first grade teacher needs to understand, when we have a kiddo who's presenting with any one of the or all of these different things, whatever that all inclusive list might be. Okay, they're our kid. What are we going to do for them? Because we're not passing them off to the next person. These are our resources. How are we going to deploy our resources here? We're always going to have those curveballs that get thrown at us here. So that's how we look at it, as efficacy.
That's so good. It's such a good point, Ed. And thinking about my own children, where sometimes we'll go from having a really great year under this teacher, and then we'll go to the next teacher and we're like, oh, it's not the same. And then the next year it's great. And that, right. And so kind of putting those supports in place so that there's really consistency across, so that, when one teacher steps away or they transfer to the next teacher, they've really got those same systemic supports in place. That's great. Shannon, do you have something there?
Yeah, I want to add one thing, and that is, that for me was the impetus for Engage to Learn. It's like it shouldn't be the luck of the draw which teacher you get, because of how much it impacts your trajectory in life. So for us, it was about, and it's not, we don't have the luxury in education of, implementing the Jim Collins, oh, just get the right people on the bus. It's like, well, we don't have enough teachers. So every teacher, you've got to create, again, I said this before, but if you want sustainable systems, you have to look at it from a systems viewpoint and systems thinking, which means it's not just a classroom system, it's a school system, it's a district system. So if we're treating all teachers the same and our PD is one size fits all, guess what we're going to get in the classroom? One size fits all. So if we want a system that's sustainable, we need to create, again, you can call it MTSS for the adults, but it's flexible and differentiated supports, because I promise you the emergency certified teacher needs something different than the 10-year vet. And the person who, was a elementary principal that's now a high school principal needs something different than the other way around, that somebody that taught in a high school and is now an elementary principal. So we need a differentiated system of supports, and that culture of everybody needs different things, as that is perpetuated with adults and they see the value of that, that will sustain the systems in the classroom because it becomes conceptual, not programmatic. And I think those transactional programs, which is what educators have been trained, oh, this is the new thing we're doing, this too will pass, all those things, it becomes more of the culture, then it's sustainable because you just keep doing it. You can't unknow it at that point. This is what you do, and you see the value of it, then you continue to move that forward. So I think that sustainable piece is really, really important. And Ed mentioned something, or no, I think it was Ryan actually mentioned something early about feedback. I think that's critically important. Like the only way for people to move from where they are, which is what MTSS is all about, moving from where you are to where you need to go. And it's the same for educators. We're all trying to move and grow from where we are to where the only way to do that is really quality specific feedback that helps you know what is your next step and how do you take it. So feedback systems as part of those supports for adults and learners, to me, is one of the most important pieces that you can put in place to make it sustainable over time. Culture of feedback creates this like ongoing evolving learning organization. It's really powerful.
Glad you said that, because I think, as someone who's spent a lot of time in the classroom myself, I think when it starts to really feel like an add-on, or the buzzword of the day that I'm just kind of waiting for it to pass, is when it, like you said, that it's just standardized to everyone. When I feel like it's customized and tailored to my needs, then I'm more engaged and want to be doing it. So that makes a lot of sense. That really resonates. Thank you. Good. So let's think about, kind of in light of increased legislation that's happening, that's requiring dyslexia screeners, science of reading alignment, all of those things. What guiding principles have helped you guys keep the focus on students when leadership, policy, budgets, all of those things inevitably shift? How do you keep the focus on students? Becca, do you want to jump in there? I feel like this
Sure,
is
yeah.
really your area.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for sure, in order to keep the focus on students, we need to be focused on student outcomes. Leadership is going to change, legislation is going to change, trends are going to change. But I think when you focus on student outcomes and their ability to engage with the curricula, engage with their teachers, to participate, and to, as Mike was talking about, be prepared for their future careers in the emerging workplaces of tomorrow. I think that is where we have to stay focused as educators. In order to stay aligned and make all of these changes that are being implemented sustainable. And I think that being able to zero in on the research that has, been accumulating for decades around what we know about literacy and now what is being called the science of reading, that body of literature is incredibly clear. And I think, we can see outcomes from that emerge when those practices are put in place in a sustainable way. And so I think that that to me is like the through line when everything around us continues to kind of shift and evolve, is keeping our focus on student outcomes and the research behind it.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else want to add anything there? keeping up with shifts in budget, policy, legislation, and instead really keeping the focus on the students?
I think we've kind of covered a lot of the things, right? If we focus on meeting kids where they are, which we certainly have capacities now, tools like eSpark are doing a phenomenal job of developing and building that capacity for us. If this is really about kids, it should never be a question of whether it's sustainable or whether it will pass the legislative test, right? But I think the obligation we have as educational leaders right now is to really push the limits of questioning everything we've ever done. Understanding, yes, we have to know how to read, right? We need literacy, we need communication skills. And I think being able to look at that and try to forecast how much is that going to be impacted going forward? What will technology look like? We know the tools that we're using. I mean, personally, I've watched eSpark develop in the last 8 months. It's phenomenal, the work that they're doing. And I'm not saying that because Ryan's on the thing with us here. Okay, it really has. It's empowered our teachers, which has empowered our kids, or vice versa. I would argue it has empowered our kids, which is empowering our teachers.
Yeah.
I think that piece of it becomes then a whole lot more independent, which it should be. Education of kids should never be limited to policy or legislation or any of those things, which are too often misaligned with ulterior motives. If there's ever been a time in this country where we need to understand the globally competitive environment our kids are going to be in and prepare them for that, we ought to know that those things can't control or limit what we're doing.
Great, thank you for that.
If I can just add to that, Ed, you said something that I'm going to memorialize, which is, they're our kids, so how do we help them? Like, we're not going to pass them off. But just acknowledging, as an outsider, I think it's safe for me to do this. Like, every district has silos, and the policies and the requirements that districts have to follow reinforce those silos. And the degree to which, Mike and Ed and your leadership, you buck those trends, I think that's very admirable, but there's always going to be some degree of that motion that has to happen in the context of, let's face it, you also don't have all the resources you need at your fingertips. And so, one of the use cases that just came up recently is a partner that we have in North Carolina, and they had been using eSpark for Tier 1 instruction, a fairly standard way, and it was just by happenstance, their school improvement leadership showed up to the meeting, and they described sort of an eye-opening moment where they thought this could be really meaningful for us to support tiered intervention, which in the case of this district I will not name, was a completely siloed and separate model. Everything was separate. And, anytime we have those opportunities to experiment and break that mold of the silo that we have, I think that we should take it, and we should always anchor that work in progress monitoring and looking at those student outcomes. To your point, Becca, if you know that the outcomes are going in the right direction, then I suppose I would say you should be able to look back and see what you've changed and what you're doing, and either iterate on that or improve it. But certainly acknowledge when you see those changes and build your systems around what's actually working, as opposed to maybe what for the last 20 or 30 years you may, we've all been taught what should be or what you could do. And I think you can really move the needle that way if you think in an innovative way at this moment in time.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for mentioning outcomes, because that's exactly where I'm headed next. What I want to hear from you guys is one win that you've seen. That could be data, that could be a story, but we'll start with our district leaders, just a quick 60 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever you need, to share a win that you've seen with regard to MTSS. Mike or Ed, do you guys want to go first?
Sure, I can. I think that it kind of brings full circle everything we've been talking about. We've talked about outcomes, we've talked about the silos, we went to a completely personalized environment, not in literacy, but in mathematics in eighth grade last year, full
Mm.
year. We saw some kids, because they got the equivalent of MTSS throughout good tier one instruction. And I should say our teacher has spent 20 years in special ed prior to teaching eighth grade math. So she's providing tier two, at times tier three. Because of the personalized environment, she could do that. We saw kids, literally every one of our eighth graders, complete all of eighth grade math to mastery. No more minimal compliance, no more D minus, all the
Wow.
way to mastery. At the
Amazing.
same time, everything we talked about, engagement went up, attendance went up, behaviors went down. But the most pressing thing was a young person who had never, ever been at grade level, had all kinds of siloed supports, struggled in math all the way through. By halfway through the year, was teaching other kids math with a level of confidence you cannot possibly imagine. Okay. In even being able to verbalize, I never thought I was good at math. Well, it had never been provided for her where she was.
Right.
I think that's the power of where this is heading. If we really look at MTSS in total, complete, integrated methodology.
That's powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Ed?
It is that the wins are in that system that's getting built as we continue in elementary and middle school grades. I mean, our teachers are seamlessly working together. The kids are benefiting from that and seeing the success as they go grade level through grade level there, and not just being passed through the system, but rather growing through the system. And our teachers are seeing that as the kids matriculate from one grade level to the next, they're seeing that the learning that the kids are capable of and the learning that the kids are engaged with is of a higher caliber right there. So everyone is benefiting from as we build this outcomes.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Shannon, we'll go to you next.
Sure. I will say that we have a platform called Grow Lab that not only supports but measures like teacher growth with badges. And we did a data party this summer. We call it a party. It's really digging into all the data. And we saw something, and it's actually similar to what Mike said in our middle schools that we were working in. And I don't think people are talking much about middle school right now. There's a lot of focus on literacy in elementary. There's a lot of focus on career readiness in high school. But middle school right now, COVID kindergartners are going into middle school. Middle schoolers are the ones that will be fully immersed in an AI economy that they're going to have to understand how to navigate, think critically, and use those soft skills and future ready skills, like Mike said. And what we saw is that in the middle schools where we were able to support them in fully implementing MTSS, and they had truly differentiated, integrated tier one and tier two, that those schools had just blown the roof off on every measure. So not only double digit gains in performance, but increases in attendance that were even paying the school back basically. Some schools gaining as much as $200,000 a year in budget from increased attendance, chronic absenteeism going down, discipline referrals going down by like 17%, and teacher retention going up by 14%. So again, all those measures coming together. And then the most exciting thing about it is we had some schools come to us and say, we want to also measure student soft skills or future ready skills, these employability skills. And so we extended Grow Lab to be able to do that for kids and badge them on those skills. And all of that comes together. And you've got this, it's legislation that required MTSS. If you implement it in a certain way, you get all the beautiful outcomes that you want from education, essentially. And that's what we were seeing in the data. So very exciting times, very exciting times.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Ryan.
Well, I started to talk about this example, and I would say the shape of the work that I've seen be most effective is how districts are being more intentional about measuring the success they want to see in their students, and not in an aspirational way. I think we all want the best for students. We want every student to be successful. We want achievement to go through the roof. I love hearing those success stories, but I think setting measurable, time-based targets is something that we understand school districts need critically, to be available, and not just twice a year to the administration or the leadership team, but really down to the classroom. And, one of the things that we've seen is empowering teachers to see just how students are progressing standard to standard, how they're, going through their work and being able to, listen and read and actively engage in the content that they're going through when it's differentiated and they're doing a lot of independent work is a really powerful sort of part of the toolkit for teachers. And with everything going on, I'm just excited to continue getting that feedback from the classrooms in which our product is being used, and realistically just listening to what's going on around the nation and figuring out what else we need to do to solve the gaps that are, almost certainly not going to go away. We just need to kind of try to plug the holes as quickly as we can where they have the most impact. So that's maybe that's a somewhat abstract answer, Jeannie, but hopefully it gives you the spirit of where my head is at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, thank you to all of you guys for your focus. I mean, it seems to be a very singular focus on tailored learning, right, for students and making it engaging for them. Like Mike was saying, kind of cultivating that love of learning. And so I think that's really coming through for all of you guys. Thank you. Becca, how about you?
Sure. Yeah. We had a really unique opportunity over the summer where one of our team members organized a series of, we called them off mute sessions, where we brought together speech language leaders from around the country in different district lead positions to talk about MTSS and what it's looking like in their region, in their state, in their district, and then what each of them are doing to really start to integrate speech and language interventions at the tier 2 level. And it was really inspiring to meet with this group repeatedly over the summer because what I noticed the most was how people were feeling very motivated and excited again about their work in the schools when it came to collaborating with their peers in the general ed classroom, the classroom teachers, as well as other folks on their MTSS teams, because they all recognized that like how much more power we can have when we're working together as a team on these initiatives. And also getting inspiration from each other on like, how do you even bring this up to your administrators? How do you get them on board with, integrating this approach from a speech and language perspective as well? And I think that, there's some really, really cool success stories out there. San Diego Unified is one of them where they've been doing this for years. And there's some other districts around the country, one that we're working with in Oklahoma, Putnam City, that is really putting this out district wide. We trained 45 of their SLPs, and their SLPs are now in turn training the building classroom teachers. And it's really been exciting to kind of watch that collaboration occur, and also sort of like reigniting this passion in the school-based professionals who've been really working doing the best they can, but really working under circumstances that have been difficult. And it's nice to really see them excited again about student learning and collaborating with their fellow teachers.
Yeah, that walking away with that energy is priceless.
Yes.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you. So just to kind of summarize what I'm hearing from you guys, this is what I'm taking away. I've heard that MTSS is strongest when tier 1, 2, and 3 are connected rather than siloed, right? I'm hearing literacy outcomes really depend a lot on language foundations. And I'm hearing that sustainable systems protect staff and improve student outcomes, both things. If there's anything I missed there, let me know. But I think that those are 3 great takeaways from this session. I really appreciate you guys taking the time today to really share that expertise and experience with district leaders around the nation. And it's being able to put this into something that's bite-sized and that folks can access when they need it is really helpful. So, and open access and that sort of thing. So thank you for taking time out to kind of support decision makers with this. It was really a joy speaking with you guys. For anybody who is watching the webinar, please be sure to go to the comments on the webinar to access any resources that our panelists might want to post that are going to help you actually implement, right? We're all about not just giving you the insights, but how do I make this into a concrete action? So help you implement a sustainable and systemic MTSS system in your district. Go also to golearntoday.org for more webinars, podcasts, research briefs, all designed to help K through 12 district leaders make decisions. Be sure also to sign up for our newsletter so that you can be in the loop on all of our offerings. It's always 100% free to district leaders. So thank you guys again. I really appreciate your time and have a good afternoon.